Are you ready to untangle from your past, recover from heartbreak, and revive your life? This is Soul CPR with your host, Ann Papayoti. We've all had soul-crushing experiences and lost ourselves in our pain, but there is a way out. On this podcast, Amazon best-selling author, award-winning life coach, and advice columnist Ann Papayoti helps us navigate the path from heartbreak to healing. So now, please welcome the host of Soul CPR, Ann Papayoti.
Hello and welcome to Soul CPR. Thank you for tuning in. I'm happy you're here, and I hope something shared today will be helpful for you. And today's topic actually came from you, my audience. Specifically, you've asked me about recognizing unhealthy relationships and when they're too toxic to repair and when you feel stuck. And some of you say you don't even know if you would know what a healthy relationship should or could be. So let me mention that if you're new to Soul CPR and were drawn in by this topic, there are some prior episodes you may want to go back to and listen or watch when you can. Coming to mind in this moment are episodes, I believe they're numbers 3 and 5. One is about purging relationships and the other about rebound relationships. So there may be some content there that would interest you. Now, I've also previously spoken with clients, speaking of content, but with clients who share their fears about being alone and therefore staying in what they know are unhealthy and toxic relationships. And I recently had a conversation in session with someone I would call a beautiful, smart, vibrant, and witty 70-something-year-old widow who is in a widow's Facebook group. And she says there's many in this group who talk about what they accept in relationships with men they dub grumpy old men. Although grumpy could be replaced, at least in her case, with manipulative, controlling, and borderline abusive. And she says her experience is similar to others in the group and that they all keep holding on to forgo being alone in their latter years. So this bodes the question, why is a partner of any quality more important than oneself? Now, for my client and her situation-specific Facebook group participants, I may need to consider a fully dedicated episode, but regardless, I hope they hear this one for starters. Before we dive in, I've had a few questions from last week's show about breaking up with a narcissist that I'd like to address before we get into today's content. Questions like, why do true narcissists ignore messages, block, or ghost people? Well, like anything a narcissist does, it is to serve their purpose. They know what they're doing and they know that it hurts you and they have no remorse. They only act like it. They only act like they care or are apologetic when that behavior serves them. It's all part of their control dynamic, that push-pull game that you may have heard about. And they thrive from the trauma bond that we mentioned, the trauma bond that is created, meaning the emotional attachment that you have with them because of the confusing cycles of negative and abusive behaviors interspersed with those seemingly positive and loving acts. So it becomes this roller coaster of highs and lows. And research has shown that our brains actually respond to this type of intermittent reinforcement in a very powerful way. In fact, some forms of gambling capitalize on this psychological concept to hook people into placing more bets. Slot machines actually do this. There will be a small win amid lots of loss, then another win, and they keep you playing. Make sense? So this is why so many people struggle to leave these types of relationships with narcissists. There's this this loving act, and then there's all these really negative, abusive, really putting you down type situations, and they come back with something that keeps you hooked and in the relationship. And that is why on this previous episode I emphasized that experts say the only way out of a relationship with a narcissist is a decision and then a commitment to go zero contact, no exceptions. You cannot out manipulate or out communicate a master manipulator. You were the victim for a reason, and that reason that made you vulnerable to them also makes you beautiful in so many other ways. But you must now reclaim yourself and know yourself and recognize the early signs when you're in an unhealthy or toxic relationship. And the other question I get is, can a narcissist actually have a long lasting relationship? Absolutely. Of course they can, until they decide they're done, or more likely, as long as you and I will stay and enable the relationship to continue. And that, my friends, becomes about us, the why we stay. And that brings us to today. We must take responsibility for recognizing and ending unhealthy relationships. We must first be a healthy partner ourselves, and we must believe we deserve the same. And that can be the hardest part of all. But we will certainly never achieve that as an individual while in a toxic partnership. If only what we see is what we get, right? I used to love to watch the Bachelor and Bachelorette. It started as a connection to my mom while we lived in different countries. It was something we'd enjoy chatting about on the phone each week. My mom, who has since passed away, she passed in November of 2017, loved watching the show to see the girls' evening gowns and the dreamy destinations that the contestants would be whisked away to for their adventurous and rather unusual speed dating opportunities. And she loved predicting who would end up falling in love by their initial spark, while I became more interested in observing human behavior, both among the contestants themselves in the house and in the developing romantic interests. And I called my watching the show research and development for my business. I truly found it interesting knowing that the bachelor or bachelorette would not be privy to all that we, the audience, would see and hear. And so I was most interested in the bachelor or bachelorette's ability to discern red flags in the limited time they spent with the contestants. I was certainly taking notes of what I saw developing. Again, I considered this research. And if you also have watched the show, you know that some do pick up on and call out the red flags and some do not. And some contestants would step in and try to protect the bachelor or bachelorette by telling them what they fear is being missed. And as the saying goes, the messenger always gets shot. They always got eliminated, didn't they? And the results on the show are what they are. Both franchises, The Bachelor and The Bachelorette, combined have a 19% success rate. I don't know what you think about that. In 27 seasons, The Bachelor has 5 couples still together. And in 20 seasons, The Bachelorette has 4 couples still together. Now, of The Bachelor's 5 couples, 2 of the women were not the first choices. In fact, the first choices were left early on for the runners up. Now, in the moment, that may have seemed rather harsh, but in the long run, those 2 second choices have been the long lasting relationships. So perhaps those 2 bachelors realized their mistake and course corrected quickly at the risk of judgment, criticism, and hurting others. Absolutely. And that was, pretty much as public as it could possibly be, right? It really was. But what would you do? What would I do? Would we have done the same? And why or why not? Would we have stayed stuck with our initial decision? Now, just to add to the total information from Bachelor Nation, there are a reported 16 additional couples still together, dating, engaged, or married, who met just by being part of that franchise. Apparently, they have a lot of social different interactions, and they all meet each other. So that's more couples together having met through that organization. But what about when there's more than just that oops from those two bachelor couples? More than just a oops and my heart is somewhere else. What about starting to recognize a relationship is unhealthy or toxic even? Will you let it go? Will you choose you? Well, first, you must recognize it is unhealthy. And that is what some of my clients and listeners say they're not even sure of. So let's spell it out, shall we? Let's do it. You got to be able to face it. And sometimes it's obvious when that line is crossed between healthy and unhealthy, and sometimes it isn't, or there wouldn't be so many confused people out there still holding on. So, what is crossing a line? When is it unhealthy and toxic? How do you define it? Is the line physical abuse? Is the line sexual violence? Is the line literal infidelity? And is the line blurred when it feels unhealthy and toxic? And when I say feels unhealthy and toxic, I don't mean that one argument or forgotten anniversary. I mean a pattern of behavior, a chronic condition, if you will, that affects your mind, your body, and your spirit. Is it an unhealthy union and therefore toxic? Now, today we're going to focus on the romantic relationship, but toxic is toxic. You may have a friendship that's toxic that you need to let go of. It is your responsibility to detox your life, and we'll talk more about that later. Now, I used to also love comedian Jeff Foxworthy's "You Might Be a Redneck If" stand up, and then I think he might be smarter than a fifth grader or something like that. But anyway, let's use that to help clear up those blurred lines, okay? You might be in a toxic relationship if you feel bad about yourself, like you aren't good enough in some way. You might be in a toxic relationship if you feel like you can never do anything right because your partner criticizes everything you do, from the simplest of things, from how you fold the towels, a client mentioned to me this week, to how you wear your hair. You might be in a toxic relationship if you feel unsupported in your interests and hobbies, and possibly are even put down for even having them. You might be in a toxic relationship if you feel you must be the problem because you are told you are the problem. You might be in a toxic relationship if you feel powerless in the relationship. There's no balance, only dictator and subject, and you are not at the top of that tier. And on the flip side, you might be in a toxic relationship if you feel you do everything, that you are carrying the burden of the relationship and they're just along for the ride. You might be in a toxic relationship if you feel insecure. Perhaps they flirt with others or talk about others or make you feel uncomfortable with how they behave with others. Perhaps how they seek attention. You might be in a toxic relationship if you feel exhausted and drained, if dealing with your partner is literally sucking the energy out of you. You might be in a toxic relationship if you feel smothered, if you can't be alone, or if they have to know your every move and who you spend your every moment with. You might be in a toxic relationship if you feel alone in the relationship, from being stonewalled, shut down, ignored, or punished by their unresponsiveness to something that is important to you. You might be in a toxic relationship if you feel worse when you are with them. You may have even missed them and looked forward to seeing them, only to realize that they aren't as delighted to see you. You either aren't their priority or the subject of their criticism. You might be in a toxic relationship if you feel you must walk on eggshells to keep the peace. You might be in a toxic relationship if you feel like you've lost your identity, changed who you are to try to please them, if you've forgone your dreams and your goals, and you've allowed separation from the people who could keep you connected to a sense of your true self. So if you've answered yes to any of these, you might be in toxic relationship, then your relationship needs some guidance at best and to be ended at worst. Is it too toxic to repair? What do you believe? What to do? We're going to talk about that in our next segment. It's time for our first break, so don't go far. We'll be back with more Soul CPR.
Mike Zorek, a three-time California state champion in Greco-Roman wrestling at 114 pounds. Mike, blind since birth, was born in Hartford, Connecticut. He was a six-time national placer, including 2 seconds, 2/3, and 2/4. He also won the Veterans Folk-Style Wrestling twice at 152 pounds. In all these tournaments, he was the only blind competitor. Nancy Zorek, a creative spirit whose talents have taken her to the stage and into galleries and exhibitions in several states. Her father, a commercial artist who shared his instruments with his daughter and helped her fine-tune her natural abilities, influenced her decision to follow in his footsteps. Ms. Zorek has enjoyed a fruitful career doing what she loves. Listen Saturday mornings at 12 Eastern for the Nancy and Mike Show for heartwarming stories and interesting talk on the BBM Global Network.
Are you struggling to care for elderly parents or a spouse? Do you wonder if being a caregiver is making you sick? Are you worried about taking time off work to care for elderly parents and balance work, life, and caregiving? Has caregiving become exhausting and emotionally draining? Are you an aging adult who wants to remain independent, but you're not sure how? I'm Pamela D. Wilson. Join me for the Caring Generation radio show for caregivers and aging adults, Wednesday evenings, 6 Pacific, 7 Mountain, 8 Central, and 9 Eastern, where I answer these questions and share tips for managing stress, family relationships, health, well-being, and more. Podcasts and transcripts of the Caring Generation are on my website, PamelaDWilson.com, plus my caregiving library, online caregiver support programs, and programs for corporations interested in supporting working caregivers. Help, hope, and support for caregivers is here on the Caring Generation and PamelaDWilson.com.
Welcome back, everyone. Thank you for joining me today on Bold Brave TV. We are talking about toxic relationships. So we just went through a list of signs of what can be considered an unhealthy or toxic relationship. So did you recognize any for yourself? So what can you do if you think your relationship is unhealthy or toxic? Unhealthy relationships are built on power and control, and the line between those and abusive is very unclear sometimes. Now, in the beginning, unhealthy behaviors might not seem like a big deal. They may even be super subtle and and leave you questioning if events happened even as you perceive they did. And that means your sense of reality is already being distorted as self-doubt begins chipping away at your self-esteem. So, do you even understand why we call this toxic? Think of the word poison. What does poison do? It paralyzes its victim. It dries them up from the inside out. It renders them helpless. And in small doses, it's very slow and painful. And often it's undetectable until the victim is too far gone to receive an antidote. So, why do so many of us ignore or miss or excuse red flags? Well, the widow group that I mentioned in the first segment would say to prevent being alone in their latter years. So I have to ask you, would you rather be healthy alone or sick with someone else? I believe this is how Dr. Phil states it. Well, there are other options than being alone. Didn't the Golden Girls serve as a model for that lifestyle for the widow group? And that reminds all of us, regardless of our age, of the importance of keeping and making friends, staying connected to others. It's never too late to find people with the same interests and goals and to plug yourself into a community in which you share common values. We all have a need for belonging, but approaching even a friendship from a place of neediness can lead us into toxic relationships. So it comes down to knowing ourselves first, who we are, what we stand for, so we don't fall for anything or anyone. And what we want out of life is what we must know. That's step one. Step two is to learn how to put boundaries around this full definition of who we are and to value ourselves by committing to and protecting us as we then invite others into our lives. That becomes step three. Being both welcoming and discerning, removing magical and fantasy thinking, willing to see red flags for what they are. But what if you feel stuck in an unhealthy relationship? To you, I say this: you are never stuck. I mean, I get it. I felt that way too. I felt trapped by my own beliefs about my marriage vows, my religious interpretation, fear of judgment by my church, my community, my friends, my family. I felt imprisoned by his words, my ex-husband's, that no one would ever love me, that I was a pitiful excuse for a woman, that I would never do better than him, that I could not make it on my own. And I felt buried in shame and guilt and blame for my choice in him as my husband. I felt embarrassment, humiliation. And I felt threatened that if I left him, it would be the last thing I ever did. I felt fear for my parents, my one living child at the time, and for myself. But nothing is permanent unless we allow it to be. Change is a constant in life. It is the condition of nature, of the planet, and of human life. You can create change when you start with how you think about yourself and how you think about your relationship. There was a recent article in USA Today that talked about how Gen Zers are starting to regret their tattoos. And the eldest of that generation are hitting their latter 20s now and are starting to get married and apparently don't like what they are seeing inked on their skin so much anymore as they transition their lives. And well, you know what? I get it. Tattoos, though, can be removed. And while that can be painful, and also there can be scarring remaining, it can be changed. So, ladies and gentlemen, you're never stuck. When you recognize something or someone is no longer right for you, you can initiate change. And when it's been a relationship with someone that you've cared about, it will hurt to let them go. Like a tattoo, it will be painful, but your wound will heal. It will become a scar. And that scar becomes a reminder of your experience, your lesson, your growth, perhaps, your choice, and most likely your courage of letting go and moving on. The breaking up part can be hard to do, as we said last week, when the relationship has been unhealthy, because the partner is not likely to make this part easy. So you have to focus on your emotional and physical safety. And I can't emphasize that enough. So talk to someone you trust first. You don't have to handle this alone. And if you're ready to talk about your situation, do find someone you trust. And this might be a family member, a friend, a teacher, counselor, coach, coworker, or someone else. And this might mean that you need to let go of that worry or fear of judgment to do that. Start by asking them to listen, and then just kind of take it at a pace that you're comfortable with. Sometimes how to start that conversation is what people don't know how to do. So once you've determined who it is that you trust, you ask permission to talk about it and let them know you haven't been feeling good about your relationship. You may want to let them know you're not ready to leave yet, but there's some things you'd like to share, and maybe asking for their advice. Now, if you happen to be the person that someone's confiding in, the best thing you can do is believe them. Let them know that they deserve to be in a mutually respectful and loving relationship. That's the best thing. And then give them the space and time that they need. When it comes time to talk to your partner, you do need to plan for this conversation and trust your gut. Depending on the relationship itself, you have to decide what that's going to look like and sound like. Is it going to be face to face, voice to voice, text to text? Which is best? And do you need a support system with you or on standby? That's part of the plan. And you have to remember what you know. Part of that is that you cannot convince someone else to change. And if you're breaking up with them, suddenly initiates a commitment to change. Recognize it as most likely a desperate attempt to hold on to you. The relationship has been about power and control, so this too is a tactic. If they're suddenly willing to change, then they would also be willing to do so independent of you. So it should not change your mind in that moment. And if they become abusive, punishing, demeaning, what will you do? Have that plan in place. Know in advance. If it's in person, be prepared to walk away. Voice to voice, to hang up. Text to text, to block. All of these are forms of boundaries. The goal being to stop giving them access to you. And if you ever feel like you're in physical danger, call 911 if you're in a safe place to do so. If you feel like something's not right, listen to that inner voice. Now, abuse versus toxic. Unhealthy becomes toxic because we stay too long. When we stay at toxic, it becomes abusive because now we're self-abusing by staying. That's how I look at it. How you define abuse, anything that harms you, mind, body, or spirit, is abusive. We'll talk more about this in just a bit. But what should a healthy relationship feel like? You might be in a healthy relationship, and I want you to know this is all mutual. This is both ways. When you feel respected, that means you also respect the other person. They feel it too. When I say mutual, that's what I mean. You might be in a healthy relationship if you feel valued. You might be in a healthy relationship if you feel trusted and you feel your partner is trustworthy. You might be in a healthy relationship if you feel you can disagree and not be chastised or coerced into changing your thoughts and beliefs to align with theirs. You might be in a healthy relationship if you feel supported in pursuing your individual goals and dreams. Now, I've got more you might be's that we're going to talk about when we come back, but it's time for our second commercial break, so don't go far. We're going to come back with more healthy relationship feelings, that sometimes those lines are blurred and we want to get those really clear for you. So don't go far. We'll be back with more Soul CPR.
Dr. RC will share extraordinary resources and services that promote educational success, as well as making a difference in the lives of all social workers, as well as the lives of children, adolescents, and teens of today. She will have open discussions addressing many of the issues that we face about our youth and how being employed in the uniquely skilled profession of social work for over 18 years has taught invaluable lessons through her personal experiences. She will also provide real-life facts, examples, and personal stories that will confirm that why serving as a child advocate is extremely beneficial when addressing the needs of the whole child. Listen live to Dare to Soar, Saturdays, 10 a.m. Eastern on the BBM Global Network, and tune in radio as Dr. RC will provide thought-provoking information that will empower, encourage, and strengthen students, families, and communities across our nation. You can also visit her at soarwithkatie.com. Author, radio show host, and coach John M. Hawkins reveals strategies to help gain perspective, build confidence, find clarity, achieve goals. John M. Hawkins' new book, Coached to Greatness, Unlock Your Full Potential with Limitless Growth, published by iUniverse. Hawkins reveals strategies to help readers accomplish more. He believes the book can coach them to greatness. Hawkins says that the best athletes get to the top of their sport with the help of coaches, mentors, and others. He shares guidance that helps readers reflect on what motivates them, rediscover and assess their core values, philosophies, and competencies, find settings that allow them to be the most productive, and track their progress towards accomplishing goals. Listen to John Hawkins' My Strategy, Saturdays, 1 p.m. Eastern on the BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio.
Welcome back to Soul CPR. Thank you for joining me. I'm Ann Papayotti, and today we are talking about healthy versus unhealthy relationships, and we have moved into what healthy relationships feel like. They feel respected, valued. You feel trusted, and you feel your partner is trustworthy. You feel you can disagree and not be chastised or coerced into changing your thoughts or beliefs to align with theirs. You feel supported in pursuing your individual goals and dreams. And moving on into my next feeling, you might be in a healthy relationship if you feel like you have a true partner, someone who has your back and shares responsibilities and roles in the relationship. You're co-creators of your lives together. Now, this is important because I hear often, gosh, I realize, my partner never had my back. He or she always took someone else's side no matter what it was. Why couldn't they just have my back? Wow, that's a big insight when someone is breaking up or divorcing. You might be in a healthy relationship if you feel seen, heard, and understood. That means their attention and communication with you is authentic and sincere. And you might be in a healthy relationship if you feel safe in every sense of the word, emotionally, meaning you have the ability to feel and to express without being censored. You feel safe sexually, your boundaries are respected. You feel safe financially, decisions are made together. You might be in a healthy relationship if you feel you can take care of yourself. You don't have to self-neglect to be able to also care for your partner. You might be in a healthy relationship if you can take feedback from them and consider it constructive, not destructive. And you can self-correct, knowing that whatever they've shared was with the intention of your best interest at heart and that it was done so respectfully. Isn't that awesome, right? You might be in a healthy relationship if you feel like the best version of yourself when you're with them, that they truly bring out the best in you. Now, listen, good boundaries make good relationships, just like they say, fences make good neighbors, right? So ideally, your relationships begin with boundaries, but if they've been boundaryless, you can try to impose them now. You should be able to feel comfortable expressing your needs and wants and fears and limits and hopes and being able to be truthful about how certain behaviors and situations make you feel. But most people I meet really struggle with boundary setting. Do you? Well, and some people even don't even know what a boundary is. Well, personal boundaries are really the limits you set for yourself. And that is why you have to know them before they are crossed by someone else. Or you might not recognize it until there's trauma from it having happened. Now, there are different types or categories related to how you feel comfortable or safe and where the line is for uncomfortable and unsafe. For example, when it comes to personal boundaries, you have emotional, physical, and digital boundaries. Now, emotional boundaries are those that have to do with your feelings, your moods, and your sense of trust and security. So, when it comes to emotional boundaries, you need to ask yourself, when you're thinking of this romantic relationship, whether it's marriage or boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever it is, how does your mood change when you're around them? Do you feel comfortable, nervous, anxious? So many people describe walking on eggshells, right? When they're in these unhealthy relationships. So, how do you feel? Do certain actions or words create certain feelings of anxiety or nervousness? Or do you have a sense of calm and peace? So think about your emotional boundaries around them, your feelings, your moods, your sense of trust and security. Are they violated? Physical boundaries impact your body, your personal space. Okay. So, what kind of physical contact are you comfortable with? You have to know that in advance. What about going to someone's house, going to certain establishments? And are you comfortable communicating when you need to stop, when you need time out, when you need to eat or rest or to stop drinking? What's your limit? Is it 2 drinks? Are you able to say no to the third one if someone's insisting you have the next? What about digital boundaries? These are about your online activities, your phone, how you use it, your computer. So the amount of time you spend online, about calling and texting and messaging. Are you going to answer their text at 2 a.m.? Right? What about what types of pictures you post or you allow them to take and to post? Or are you comfortable having them say about your relationship online, and what are you comfortable saying? What about seeing your phone, seeing their phone? Okay. And so these are some examples of areas of personal boundaries. And to set clear personal boundaries, again, you got to know who you are, what matters to you, and you got to know in advance. But setting these clear personal boundaries, knowing what the limits are for you, being able to communicate those can help you and your partner have a healthy relationship. When you feel hurt or when you feel disrespected in your relationship, it's usually a sign that a boundary's been violated. When you feel guilty, you've usually violated your own. Or when you feel ashamed in some way, right? But if that boundary was never communicated, how could your partner necessarily know where that line was? Communication matters. So if the relationship is new enough, if the relationship is in your mind worth attempting to salvage, then consider starting the conversation with statements like, it's important to me when, and fill in the blank, or I need you to know I feel strongly about, fill in the blank, so that your partner knows what your boundaries are, where the lines are, and so that they also know not to be critical of them, but rather to respect them. You have the right for them to be respected. However, if they do not respect them, you also have the right to end the relationship. Now, if this has been an ongoing problem and you've communicated before repeatedly until it's become wallpaper to their ears because you did not implement a consequence early on, I don't expect them to start respecting what you say now. So ultimately, boundaries at this point are for you to help you leave and help you begin anew, stronger, and prepared to protect what you've reclaimed ownership of after a bad experience. Ownership of you. Remember when I said you're responsible for you and detoxing your life? That's what I'm talking about. Much of my work in the private sector is helping people rebuild themselves. And it's truly what Soul CPR is all about. You must recover your truth to revive your life. It's sort of the before I met you truth, if you will. Hey, that sounds like a great title to a book or a movie. I may have to act on that one. Before I Met You by Ann Papayotti, coming soon, people. Listen, we tend to all focus on the other person, but it's really we ourselves who need to stand and take a look in the mirror. And I would dare say ask a few specific questions like, what unhealed wound existed before this relationship? What did I bring into this relationship? And how did that wound or trauma set me up to miss, ignore, or excuse the red flags of toxicity? And another question I would encourage you to ask yourself is, how may I be repeating a pattern of toxic relationships in my life at this point? And then go ahead and ask yourself, what is my responsibility now? What is my responsibility now? Now, adults, our young people need to know these things. I've had a couple of Gen Z clients truly lost in toxic relationships and holding on, knowing on one level, on the rational, logical level, that the relationship's not good for them, but so far in that they keep trying to fix it. Not only does logic tell them that the relationship's not good for them, but their body's telling them. They become physically ill when the next thing happens, and there's always a next thing. Their consequences in life are that they're no longer free to be themselves, to enjoy life without worry of pleasing their partner's expectations and whims, and their personalities, which were once sunny and vibrant, are now mild and subdued. If you're concerned about your young person's relationship, then I would encourage you to, without judgment, tell them something you've observed, what you've noticed. Maybe ask them if this has happened often, and then ask them how they're feeling about their relationship. They need to know that they're loved, that they're lovable, and that they will survive a breakup, even though their partner may tell them they can't live without them. They're not responsible for the other person. They are responsible for themselves, and encourage them to take ownership of their life and to care for it with the same compassion and empathy that they've bestowed on others. Your young person might think it's their fault causing them to stay in the relationship, even though it's unhealthy for them, but let them know it's not. They need to hear that. But also, while you can support them, they have to be the one to decide to end their relationship, whatever decision they make. It's important for you to respect their feelings while also showing that you care about them. All right, it's time for our final break. When we come back, we'll wrap this up today, and I'll give you some resources for those young people and for yourself. So don't go far. We'll be back with more Soul CPR.
Are you struggling to care for elderly parents or a spouse? Do you wonder if being a caregiver is making you sick? Are you worried about taking time off work to care for elderly parents and balance work, life, and caregiving? Has caregiving become exhausting and emotionally draining? Are you an aging adult who wants to remain independent, but you're not sure how? I'm Pamela D. Wilson. Join me for the Caring Generation radio show for caregivers and aging adults, Wednesday evenings, 6 Pacific, 7 Mountain, 8 Central, and 9 Eastern, where I answer these questions and share tips for managing stress, family relationships, health, well-being, and more. Podcasts and transcripts of the Caring Generation are on my website, PamelaDWilson.com, plus my caregiving library, online caregiver support programs, and programs for corporations interested in supporting working caregivers. Help, hope, and support for caregivers is here on the Caring Generation and PamelaDWilson.com.
Mike Zorich, a 3-time California state champion in Greco-Roman wrestling at 114 pounds. Mike, blind since birth, was born in Hartford, Connecticut. He was a 6-time national placer, including 2 seconds, 2 thirds, and 2 fourths. He also won the Veterans Folk-Style Wrestling twice at 152 pounds. In all these tournaments, he was the only blind competitor. Nancy Zorick, a creative spirit whose talents have taken her to the stage and into galleries and exhibitions in several states. Her father, a commercial artist who shared his instruments with his daughter and helped her fine-tune her natural abilities, influenced her decision to follow in his footsteps. Ms. Zorick has enjoyed a fruitful career doing what she loves. Listen Saturday mornings at 12 Eastern for the Nancy and Mike Show for heartwarming stories and interesting talk on the BBM Global Network.
And welcome back. At the close of the last segment, I was talking about our young people needing to hear about this. And I do have some concerned parents who speak to me in session about what their kids have witnessed and how they may now approach relationships. So if you've not been an example of a healthy relationship for your kids, go ahead and talk openly about it. Help them by being honest and maybe taking that first step of getting professional help to find yourself again and regain self-confidence to begin to show up differently in life. It's never too late to start modeling for them. I do find that younger people deal with a lot of intimidation, like the threat of being broken up with and the threat of now going to go date their friend or to show pictures that they would not want seen, or other various forms of harassment and what's known as digital monitoring, using social media to clock someone's whereabouts and activities, which is basically a form of stalking. So your young people need to know what toxic is, what abuse is, and they may not know how to define it, because at first, control, remember I said things can be very subtle. Control looks like attention. And in the beginning, that can feel like love. And don't we all want to be loved? Now, there are some specific resources for young people on www.youth.gov. And then there's the National Teen Dating Abuse Helpline. Dan, I don't know if you're able to put those on screen for me, but those will be in the show notes. And the National Teen Dating Abuse Helpline has a phone number, and that's 866-331-9474. Or they can text Love Is to 22522. Thank you. And then Dan also has the hotline.org, which is for the domestic abuse hotline, the National Domestic Abuse Hotline for all ages. They have support resources there to help us really define this and help people understand that just because there's no perhaps physical violence doesn't mean that it's not abuse. Emotional abuse is far underestimated and minimized. So what's your key takeaway from today? I would love to know if you would send it in or put it in the guest chat. I'd love to hear from you. But I want you to know that for a relationship to be toxic, it doesn't just require, behavior from one of the partners. It also requires the willingness of the other one to stay. And often that comes from this false hope of change. And this taking on the burden of responsibility to fix the relationship, or to take on the blame and to try to fix yourself in that relationship. This is unrealistic and unattainable. Your thinking is often clouded when you're in a toxic relationship. So you must get out first and then work on those wounds we talked about that existed before, that allowed you to go past my boundary lessons, which are strike one, you must not have known, let me communicate. Strike two, I communicated, now you did it intentionally. Strike three, here's the consequence, you're out. Previous episodes, I talked more about that. But just because you can find some positive aspects of a relationship doesn't mean it's healthy and that you should stay in it. Remember the roller coaster, the up and down, the trauma bonding that occurs because of that confusing dynamic. So that's what I have to share for today. The next 2 weeks, I've got some amazing guests here to share topics that I know you're going to be interested in, relevant to all of us next week, losing ourselves in our roles as a parent and finding ourselves again. So I hope you will join me for that. And as we conclude this episode of Soul CPR, please remember that healing is not a linear journey. It is truly a process of profound transformation. So if today's stories resonated with you, please share this podcast with someone who may need a lifeline of their own, and connect with me through my website at skyviewcoaching.com. And there's the QR code on screen for those who are watching. And you can scan that and go straight to the website. And you can also connect with me on social media. On Facebook, it is Skyview Coaching. And on Instagram, LinkedIn, and X at Ann Papayoti. Be sure to let me know your thoughts and share your stories with me and topics you'd like to explore in future episodes. And until next time, may you find strength in your journey and courage in your vulnerability. I thank you for listening. Breathe deeply, love openly, and live soulfully. Take care.
This has been Soul CPR with host Ann Papayoti. Breathe life back into your spirit with each episode, where she and special guests explore the relationships that hurt us and discover that healing can only begin with you. Tuesdays at 3 p.m. Eastern on the Bold Brave TV network.